Hi, and welcome to the Becoming You podcast. My name is Lisa Hardy, and I am your host in this space. And if this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found your way to this space and this podcast. This is where we have real, honest conversations about motherhood, identity, self-love, and really what it actually looks like to take care of yourself in the middle of real life, the chaos that is motherhood. Not the polished version, not the just try harder advice, but the lived, complicated human experience that so many moms are navigating quietly. And today we're talking about something that comes up constantly when we talk about self-care, and that's the idea of me time. Because if you're a mom, chances are you've been told more times than you can count that you need to take more time for yourself. You need to rest more. You need to prioritize yourself. And while that advice is usually well-intentioned, it often feels impossible to follow through on, especially when life isn't calm or predictable, especially when life gets really heavy. And this episode is coming from a real place for me because the last couple of months have been emotionally full and draining in a lot of ways that I didn't expect. My grandmother passed about a month ago, and while we are still very much in the middle of processing that grief and that loss, my dad ended up in the ICU over Christmas. And suddenly, things were not going as planned. They shifted again. The plans changed. The energy itself has changed. And the focus also changed. Christmas looked nothing like we had thought it would. Never in 100 years did we think that my dad would end up in the ICU over Christmas. Instead of being at home with our traditions, we spent most of that day at the hospital with him, and it was very difficult. We were worried. We were trying to hold space for hope, but it scared us, especially on the first day that he was in there. We were exhausted. We were trying to be hopeful. We were still carrying that love with us, and everything was happening all at once. And what sort of this season reminded me is that life doesn't stop, doesn't pause so you can practice self-care. It doesn't wait for you to catch your breath. It doesn't ask if you're already overwhelmed before adding more to your plate. And in moments like this, the idea of me time, it almost feels laughable. Not because you don't want it, but because it feels so disconnected from your reality. And I think this is the part that we don't talk about enough. Me time is usually talked about as if life is stable, calm, and somewhat manageable, as if you're just sort of one quiet hour away from feeling better. And I laugh because that's not real life. It's not real life. When you're dealing with grief, stress, caregiving, emotional weight, and even uncertainty, me time doesn't magically appear. And even when it does, it doesn't land the way we hope it will. And what I've noticed in both my own life and in the lives of some of the moms that I work with is that me time often doesn't work because it's accidental. It's unplanned. It's whatever time is left after everyone else has been taken care of. It's squeezed into those little margins of the day that already really feel too full. And when that's the case, that me time, it really doesn't resonate with us. It just reminds us how tired we are, how emotionally depleted we are. I mean, for a lot of moms, me time looks like we sit down only to be interrupted a few minutes later. It looks like scrolling through our phone because you don't have the energy to do anything else. It looks like feeling guilty the entire time, or rushed, or like you should be doing something maybe a little bit more productive. And then when it doesn't help, we quietly turn that into another story about ourselves. And it becomes another place like we feel like we're failing. But here's the thing I want you to remember, and I want to say this very clearly, is that me time isn't failing you and that you're not bad at self-care. The problem is that me time, as it's usually presented, doesn't really account for real life. It doesn't count for grief. It doesn't count for all the emotional labor that we're carrying. And it doesn't count for the mental load that moms carry every single day. What usually makes a difference isn't more me time. It's the intentional time that has been thought about, planned for, and time that is protected, especially before life gets heavy, not for when it actually does. And I want to talk about the protected piece that I just mentioned, because oftentimes, even if we do schedule something for ourselves as moms, we are usually the ones to say, well, I could do that later if we need to do this instead. And that is such an important element that we are going to be talking about today, because that time deserves to be protected, but it also needs to be protected. We are the glue that hold our families together. We carry the mental load. We carry the emotional load. And yes, we could have fantastic partners that help us out, have husbands that show up for us, have a partner that shows up for us each and every day. But let's be honest, mothers usually carry more. We as moms usually carry more, and our time should be something that's considered sacred, especially if we're planning it out. And this is where something like Monday Hour One comes in. Monday Hour One comes from Brooke Castillo. She is a life coach and educator. And it's often what I personally like to call my Sunday service sessions. I want to be clear here, because sometimes whenever we hear things about something that, just feels like planning, they immediately think productivity, structure, rigid schedules, and that's not what this is. It can be if that's what you like and that's how you manage your day, but it's not really about doing more. It's about supporting yourself better. And that is the core of the Sunday service sessions. And the concept of Monday Hour One or Sunday service sessions is simply the first intentional hour of every week, usually done on a Sunday or Monday. It's a little bit more quiet. I'm not working my full-time job, and it's just easier for me to sit down for an hour on Sundays, whether that's the morning or evening. Usually it's the evening after the kids go to bed, and that is my protected time to do my Sunday service session. It's a moment where you pause before the week takes over and you actually check in with yourself. Not just your to-do list. Your to-do list is part of it, but it's not everyone else's needs. It's you. It's a moment where you can actually sort of zoom out that lens and say, what kind of week am I walking into? And what do I need to feel supported inside of it? And what I've learned, especially during seasons like the one I'm in right now, is that when life is heavy, you actually need more structure around your care, not less. When my dad was in the ICU and our days revolved around hospital visits and the phone calls and the emotional whiplash, I didn't have the luxury of spontaneous self-care. I needed to decide ahead of time where rest would live. Because if I didn't, it simply just wouldn't happen. A Sunday service session doesn't mean you're planning every minute of your life, although some people do use it that way. But it really means looking at the week ahead with honesty. It means noticing where the emotional weight already exists. It means acknowledging the things you can't change, like your work schedule, for example. And then asking yourself, where is it that you can soften the edges a little bit? Maybe it's deciding that one evening is off limits for errands. So during this time, 2-hour window, no errands will be taking place, and you can decide what to do at that time. Maybe it's starting one morning slower. Maybe it's intentionally not overbooking yourself when you know your capacity is already low. And this part really matters, because when you sit down to do this, you always start with your own care. That is I would say the number one rule of Monday Hour One, your Sunday service sessions. You always put yourself first. And that's not being selfish. I know you might be thinking, well, I can't do that. The reality is that you can. You can do this. You, as I said before, you are the glue that holds your family together. If you are not taking care of yourself, then everything around you is likely going to fall apart. You're going to end up burnt out. You're going to be resentful. You're going to feel guilty. We want to prevent all of that. And in order to do that, you need to put yourself first. And I encourage you to do that. So when you sit down for your sessions, you carve out your time first, not last, not only if there's time, first. You ask yourself, what do I need this week? And then you actually put yourself on the schedule. You don't leave it as a hope. You don't treat it like a suggestion. You treat it the same way you would a doctor's appointment. You schedule in your doctor's appointment, something you don't cancel just because life gets busy. It's something that matters enough to protect it. That time is to be protected. And so many moms struggle with this because we pencil ourselves in while everything else gets written in permanent marker. And then when something comes up, we're the first thing to be erased. But when you decide ahead of time that your care is non-negotiable, something shifts. You stop asking for permission to exist in your own life. And the more you do it, the more you put that permanent marker and schedule your time and show up for yourself, the more confidence you're going to get, the more self-trust you're going to get. And your self-worth will also likely increase. And the next step, once your care is anchored in, then you build out the rest of your week around it. It's not the other way around. You look at what's already there, what has to happen, work, for example, doctor's appointments, and where you can be realistic instead of aspirational. And this isn't about creating a perfect week. They don't exist, but it's really about creating a supportive one that acknowledges your capacity instead of constantly pushing it aside. And me time isn't about escaping your life. It's about being supported inside of it. And that distinction really changes everything, especially when life gets fragile or uncertain or emotionally raw. If me time has never worked for you, it's not because you're doing it wrong. I do want to reiterate that. It's because you've been trying to care for yourself in a system that wasn't designed to hold you. You deserve more than the scraps of rest and rush moments of quiet that are often the last thing available. You deserve intention. You deserve space. You deserve to matter in your own life, even and especially when everything else feels heavy, when it feels like too much. This is something I support deeply inside of my community, the Joyful Mom Collective, where I'll be hosting a full Sunday service session workshop and also running live Sunday service sessions for our members to do together, because sometimes it's easier to show up for yourself when you're not doing it alone. The community itself is free to join, and there's already a lot of support inside with some additional elements available through a paid membership for those who want to go a little deeper. But at its core, it's really about creating a space together to intentionally care for ourselves in the middle of real life. And if nothing else, I hope this episode reminds you that you are not alone in this. Real life affects our capacity for self-care. Grief changes the way we move through the world. Stress impacts our nervous system, and that doesn't mean you're failing. You're just human, and that's okay. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with another mom who might need this reminder today. And if you're craving more support, connection, and guidance around intentional self-care and creating space for yourself, you're always welcome to join my community. The link is in the show notes below. And remember, you are worth showing up for. Always. I'll see you next time on the Becoming You podcast.